If you wanted to build a single state that perfectly represents all of America, every race, every income bracket, every age group in the exact right proportions, you would accidentally build Illinois. It matches national averages across roughly 30 demographic variables. It is not close to average, it is the average. But 1 in 4 residents told Gallup it is the worst possible place to live. That is not the worst result in America. It is the worst in the history of the survey. How did the most average state become the most miserable? The answer starts with a promise made 50 years ago that nobody can afford to keep, and it begins, not with demographics, but with dirt. The crossroads that built a mirror. Illinois sits on some of the most productive land on Earth, and that is not an exaggeration. Flat prairies stretching from the shores of Lake Michigan to the bluffs of the Mississippi River, covered in glacial soil so deep and dark that early farmers called it black gold. But the soil alone did not make Illinois what it is. Position did. Chicago sits at the continental hinge, the single point where East Coast trade networks, southern river systems, and the western frontier all collide. The Great Lakes connect it to the Atlantic through the St. Lawrence Seaway. The Illinois River flows south into the Mississippi, linking Chicago to New Orleans, the Gulf of Mexico, and every river port in between. When railroads arrived in the mid-1800s, they followed the same logic the waterways had already established. Engineers laid track along the flat glacial plains because the terrain practically invited it. No mountain passes to blast through, no gorges to bridge, just open prairie waiting for steel rails. Chicago became the place where every line converged. By the late 1800s, more rail lines passed through Chicago than any other city on the planet. The Union stockyards processed millions of cattle shipped in by rail from the western plains. Grain elevators towered over the lakefront, stuffed with wheat from a dozen states. Goods, people, and ambition all funneled through the same bottleneck, and the city swelled with every arrival. That convergence did not just make Illinois an economic crossroads, it made it a demographic one. The Great Migration brought hundreds of thousands of black Southerners north to Chicago's factories. Waves of Polish, Irish, Italian, and Eastern European immigrants flooded in through the same rail corridors. Later came arrivals from Latin America and Asia, drawn by the same gravitational pull that had attracted everyone before them. Meanwhile, downstate Illinois remained what it had always been: rural, agricultural, small town, conservative. The state assembled every slice of America inside its borders, not by design, but by position. The proof showed up in an unexpected place. When marketers wanted to test whether a product would sell nationally, they tested it in Peoria, Illinois. "Will it play in Peoria?" became an industry catchphrase, because if something worked there, it worked everywhere. Companies treated the entire state as a laboratory for the American consumer. Illinois was not just average, it was useful for being average, a living focus group for the nation. But being a perfect mirror of America came with a cost that nobody anticipated. The machine behind the mirror. Chicago's political machine was one of the most powerful in American history. For decades, it ran on patronage, government jobs handed out as currency, loyalty extracted as the price of entry. Ward bosses controlled neighborhoods block by block. Backroom deals decided who got hired, who got contracts, and who got left behind. This system held together an extraordinarily diverse coalition. It delivered services, paved roads, picked up garbage, and kept the city functioning through sheer force of political will. But it also made promises it could never keep. Public pensions were the big one. Generous retirement packages negotiated as political favors, with the bill quietly shoved into the future. Year after year, pension obligations grew while the actual funding fell further behind. Politicians found it easier to promise benefits than to pay for them. Unions accepted the deals because the contracts looked ironclad. Taxpayers did not notice because the payments were deferred. And for a while, the math seemed to work, or at least nobody looked closely enough to see that it didn't. By the time anyone tried to fix it, the hole was already hundreds of billions deep. And here's the part that turned a bad situation into a catastrophe. Illinois' state constitution explicitly protects pension benefits. Courts blocked every attempt to restructure the debt, The money was owed, the Constitution said so, and no legislature could change that. The bill was coming due, and there was no legal way to reduce it. Corruption compounded the damage. Illinois became the only state in the country to send 4 of its last 7 governors to federal prison. Not accused, not investigated, convicted and sentenced. Public trust did not just erode, it cratered. The state that mirrored America's demographics had also mirrored, then exceeded, America's worst instincts about kicking the can down the road. The pension crisis alone would have been devastating. But what happened next turned a fiscal problem into a human stampede. The doom loop. To cover the pension shortfall, Illinois raised taxes. Repeatedly. Property taxes climbed among the highest in the nation. In some suburban counties, a family might pay $8,000 or $10,000 a year on a modest home. Income taxes jumped, fees multiplied, but here is the trap. Higher taxes did not solve the debt. They just gave residents a reason to do the math. And when they did the math said, leave. IRS migration data tells the story in hard numbers. Tens of thousands of Illinoisans depart every year, taking billions in adjusted gross income with them. The departures skew toward higher earners in their prime working years, exactly the people whose taxes were supposed to fill the hole. They moved to Indiana, where property taxes are a fraction of what they paid. They moved to Tennessee and Texas, which have no state income tax at all. They moved to Florida and Arizona, where the weather is warmer and the fiscal outlook is brighter. Each wave of departures shrank the tax base, which deepened the deficit, which required higher taxes, which triggered more departures. A fiscal doom loop, spinning faster with every cycle. From 2013 onward, Illinois entered a rare multi-year stretch of outright population decline, one of only a handful of states shrinking while the rest of the country grew. In 2024 alone, Illinois lost 56,000 residents to other states, third worst in raw losses behind only California and New York. But unlike California and New York, Illinois does not have a tech boom or a global financial capital to absorb the hit. There is no Silicon Valley generating billions in taxable wealth. There is no Wall Street anchoring the economy through sheer gravitational mass. Illinois did not just have a budget problem, it had a self-reinforcing population bleed with no natural tourniquet. And the numbers that came next revealed something even worse. A state that was not just losing residents, but losing its own sense of identity. The state that turned against itself. This is where Illinois stops being a budget story and becomes something stranger. A story about a place turning against itself. Gallup's state-by-state surveys lay it out in devastating detail. Only 25% of Illinoisans said they had a great deal or fair amount of trust in their state government. The 50-state average was 57%. That is not a gap, that is a different country. Only 19% called Illinois the best or one of the best states to live in. The national average was 46%. And then the number that captures it all. In a 50-state Gallup poll, fully half of all Illinoisans said they would leave for another state if they could. No other state in America hit that mark. Illinois stood alone. Think about what that means. The most statistically average state in the country, the one that looks like America on every demographic chart, had become, psychologically, the most extreme outlier in the nation. Illinois was not just losing residents, it was losing believers. The people who stayed did not stay because they loved it. Many stayed because they could not afford to go, locked in by underwater mortgages, family obligations, or pensions they could not transfer. Trapped in a state they no longer trusted, paying taxes they resented, watching their neighbors load moving trucks bound for Tennessee, Texas, and Florida. Gallup summarized it with a line that reads like an epitaph. Illinois has the unfortunate distinction of being the state with the highest percentage of residents who say it is the worst possible place to live. The most normal state had become the most miserable. But the story does not end there. Because someone is replacing the people who leave. And that twist changes everything. The replacement paradox. Illinois loses tens of thousands of domestic residents every year. Between mid-2024 and mid-2025, an estimated 40,000 more packed up and left. But the state's total population has not collapsed as dramatically as those numbers suggest. The reason is international immigration. New arrivals from abroad have partially offset the domestic hemorrhage, propping up the headcount even as the native-born population drains away. This creates a strange new version of the state, still demographically normal on a spreadsheet, but increasingly composed of people who chose Illinois as a landing pad rather than a lifelong home, while those who grew up there are choosing to leave. Some analysts argue the mass exodus narrative is overstated, that the population has been more stable than raw census estimates suggest, that the tax base has actually held. But even the most optimistic reading cannot escape the underlying dynamic. Illinois now depends on people arriving from other countries to replace the people fleeing to other states. The mirror of America is still intact on paper, but the social contract underneath it is being rewritten in real time. The demographic normalcy survives in the data. Whether the community that once held it together still exists is a different question entirely. 2 states, 1 border. The population churn has sharpened the other fracture that defines Illinois, the war between Chicago and everything else. The Chicago metro area holds roughly 75% of the state's residents. It dominates state politics by sheer weight of numbers. Elections, tax policy, spending priorities, Chicago decides. Downstate Illinois, conservative, rural, agricultural, has essentially no power to counter it. The cultural gap mirrors the national urban-rural divide, but in Illinois it is more extreme because both sides are trapped in the same fiscal disaster and neither trusts the other. Chicago residents blame downstate for blocking reform and electing obstructionists. Downstate residents blame Chicago for bankrupting the state with bloated public payrolls and sweetheart pension deals. A farmer in Macoupin County and a teacher on the south side share a state government, a tax code, and a pension crisis. But they share almost nothing else. They read different news, vote for different candidates, and when they picture the future of Illinois, they see 2 completely different places. The fracture has grown so deep that some downstate activists have literally proposed splitting Illinois into 2 separate states, a movement that has gained real traction in local referenda, even if it has no realistic path to becoming law. County boards have passed resolutions, petitions have circulated. The frustration is not theoretical. It is organized. The state that most resembles America also most resembles America's internal divisions: urban versus rural, progressive versus conservative, dense metro versus emptying countryside, amplified and compressed into a single border with no escape valve. So can anything actually save Illinois? The official projections are brutal, but there is one scenario where the most normal state might matter more than ever, and not in the way you would expect. Growing slower than everyone. Official state economic forecasts paint a stark picture. Illinois is projected to grow more slowly than the Midwest average and significantly slower than the nation in employment, GDP, and population over the coming decades. The state's own Commission on Government Forecasting and Accountability describes it plainly: a step behind the Midwest average and a few steps behind the nation. The pension obligations continue to compound. The tax base continues to erode. The talent pipeline continues to leak. Young people growing up in Illinois leave for college or careers in states with lower costs, better job markets, and governments they trust more. A kid from Springfield who gets into a university in North Carolina or Georgia discovers cheaper rent, lower taxes, and a city that actually feels like it is growing. They find jobs, build friendships, sign leases, and they never come back. Their parents visit once a year and wonder why the town feels emptier every time. The pattern is familiar, the same slow drain that hollowed out western Pennsylvania's steel towns or emptied the rural Great Plains. Not a dramatic collapse, but a grinding fade where every metric drifts downward just enough to be survivable, but never enough to be fixable. An official economic study concludes bluntly that weak demographic trends and deep-rooted fiscal problems represent the biggest hurdles to the longer-term outlook. Demographers now ask openly whether Illinois can even remain the most normal state much longer. As its population composition shifts faster than the nation's, Another state, perhaps Virginia, perhaps Georgia, may take its place as the demographic mirror. The title Illinois held for decades, the thing that made it useful and interesting, may quietly pass to someone else while Illinois is still trying to pay off debts from the last century. The warning no one wants to hear. Here is why this story matters beyond Illinois. If the state that most perfectly mirrors America, every demographic, every income level, every cultural fault line represented in the right proportions, can fall into a cycle of debt, distrust, and decline despite every geographic and demographic advantage, then the forces that broke Illinois are not Illinois specific. They are American. Underfunded pensions exist in dozens of states. Political corruption is not unique to Chicago. The tax and flee dynamic is playing out in California, New York, and New Jersey right now. The urban-rural Cold War is everywhere. Illinois just hit the tipping point first because it was the most normal. It had no geographic cushion, no oil boom like Texas, no tech explosion like California, no tourism engine like Florida, no financial monopoly like New York, to absorb the structural shock. Illinois was running on average, and average was not enough. Texas can paper over fiscal problems with oil revenue. California can offset outmigration with venture capital and tech IPOs. Florida can lure retirees with sunshine and zero income tax. Illinois has corn, logistics, and a pension bill that grows larger every single day. The most normal state became the canary in the coal mine for what happens when ordinary governance meets structural headwinds and nobody changes course. If it can happen in Illinois, it can happen anywhere. That is the warning. Pull up the data one last time. Illinois' racial breakdown, income distribution, age curve, still nearly indistinguishable from the national average. On paper, this is America. Now pull up the other data. Trust, satisfaction, desire to leave, population trend, the opposite of the national pattern. Same state, same people, two completely different stories depending on which chart you read. Illinois is America's mirror. But the reflection is cracked. The state that should feel the most familiar has become the place Americans most want to escape. And that might be the most American thing about it, because the impulse to leave when things go wrong, to pick up and start over somewhere else, is itself one of the oldest patterns in the country. Illinois did not stop being normal. It became a different kind of normal, the kind that shows what happens when the middle does not hold. If you want to see how geography shaped another state's fate, watch the video on screen now. And if you are not subscribed yet, now is the time.